Nothing you were taught prepared you for this. No one warned you that attraction does not answer to fairness, effort, or emotional correctness. No one told you that desire is not governed by morality, consistency, or the rules you were trained to follow in order to be good. Beneath everything you believe about connection, there is an older force operating silently, and today, if you stay, you will be forced to look directly at it. What if the very behaviors you were praised for were the same ones that quietly erased your erotic presence? What if the part of you trained to please was never designed to be desired? And how much of your frustration was born from believing in a domesticated version of attraction that never truly existed? You learned to give, to explain yourself, to soften your edges, to be emotionally available, to prove your value through patience and sacrifice. And yet, despite doing everything right, something kept slipping through your fingers. Her attention faded, her energy shifted, her body pulled away long before her words ever did. You told yourself it was timing, or insecurity, or bad luck. But the truth is more unsettling. The error was never who you were. It was the internal structure from which you acted. Have you ever noticed how your voice changes when you're trying not to lose her? How your posture subtly collapses, how your breathing shortens, how your eyes search for permission instead of holding space? Write in the comments the moment you realized attraction vanished, even though nothing wrong was said. Desire does not respond to emotional effort the way a judge responds to good behavior. Desire responds to instinct. That hollow sensation you felt when she chose someone else, even when you did everything right, was not random. It was the collision of two worlds you were never taught to separate, the world of bonding and the world of arousal. You assumed both obeyed the same laws. They do not. Character builds relationships. Instinct ignites the body. Attraction was not born in poetry or promises. It was forged in survival. Long before language, before culture, before ethics, attraction functioned as a filtering mechanism. Jung would call it the shadow. Nietzsche would call it will. Schopenhauer would describe it as a blind force overriding reason itself. The female nervous system reacts before morality has time to intervene, and that is where your confusion begins, because you were trained to operate at the level of explanation, while desire operates at the level of sensation. For thousands of years, selection did not favor the most agreeable man, but the one most grounded in direction. Not the most available, but the one most internally organized. That code did not disappear because society evolved. It simply went underground, covered by education, social narratives, and modern etiquette, and you suffered because you acted as if it no longer existed. You believed she was aroused by what she rationally admired, while her body responded to signals entirely outside conscious approval. This is not cruelty, it is programming. Attraction responds to presence, tension, rhythm, internal weight, emotional gravity. Not to sacrifice, not to pleading, not to uncontrolled giving. The man who confuses kindness with magnetism becomes safety, not provocation, refuge, not polarity. And here lies the most common trap, the belief that giving more will awaken desire. In reality, it often anesthetizes it. The man who gives everything in hopes of being chosen often becomes stability for a woman whose excitation is triggered by a completely different energetic signature, not because he is lacking, but because he never activated the cues the instinctive brain reads as masculine value. The body does not respond to moral merit. It responds to intensity with direction. This is why hypergamy is not a moral judgment. It is a selection mechanism, a biological compass oriented towards strength, trajectory, competence, and internal leadership. You do not need to agree with it. You need to understand it. Ignoring it does not weaken it. It only removes you from the game. Evolution does not demand that you pretend. It demands that you elevate. Status is not display. It is position. Ambition is not arrogance. It is internal movement. Competence is not brilliance. It is emotional sovereignty when others collapse into doubt. And here is one of the most uncomfortable truths. A woman can respect you, trust you, even admire you, and still not desire you. Because admiration does not automatically activate the nervous system. Affection does not always generate hunger. The unconscious responds to another layer of masculinity entirely: controlled risk, grounded unpredictability, the man who does not orbit her emotional state, but his own life. There is a silent error that destroys more men than direct rejection ever could, taking words literally while ignoring behavior. Between what is said and what is felt, there is an abyss, and it is inside that abyss that many men disappear without ever understanding why. She may say she wants calm, but her body leans toward intensity. She may ask for stability, but her attention awakens around the unpredictable. There is no deception in this. There is a natural gap between consciousness and instinct. The mind builds narratives, the body chooses paths. Something radical happens when a man stops seeking approval and starts observing. When you stop trying to be what pleases and begin noticing what actually activates desire, clarity emerges, brutally. Attraction is not activated by deserving. It is activated by impact, by contrast, by energy, by direction. The man who tries to please adapts. The man who is desired creates a gravitational field. Schopenhauer warned that desire is a force that moves through the individual, not something consciously commanded. This is why convincing fails, explaining fails, promising fails. Attraction does not negotiate. It either happens or it doesn't. And here comes one of the hardest truths to swallow. A woman can build a life with you without ever having felt fire. She can choose you rationally while surrendering her excitement elsewhere. Not from malice, but from internal dissociation. When a man lives to be chosen, he dissolves. When a man chooses his position, he becomes a filter. Once you become the filter, the entire dynamic shifts. You no longer enter asking for space. You decide who enters your world. The rare integration looks like this: emotional availability without emotional dependence, firmness without hostility, confidence without predictability. Most men fail here by swinging to extremes, becoming either rigid chaos or soft convenience. Neither sustains desire. A woman does not desire the man who revolves around her. She desires the man around whom something revolves, a purpose, a direction, an internal axis. Fear is the most common disguise of desire: fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of solitude. And it is precisely this fear that kills tension, the oxygen of attraction. The fearful man anticipates, over-explains, adapts prematurely, concedes before pressure is even applied. The centered man observes, decides, holds, and accepts consequences without pleading for relief. From this emerges respect, and from respect, lasting desire. Social psychology confirms this repeatedly. The man who maintains position under pressure communicates psychological strength, and strength, at the symbolic level, translates into value. Not through dominance, through solidity. The method is brutally simple and emotionally demanding. Define 3 non-negotiables: your time, your self-respect, and your purpose. Do not trade them for approval. Do not discount them for affection. Do not adjust them out of fear. Communicate them calmly, without drama, without threat, without pleading. When you do this, she stops reading you as refuge and starts experiencing you as presence. At this point, something shifts silently in the interaction field. You stop competing for attention. You start selecting. You stop over-explaining. You start acting. You stop chasing desire. You begin embodying one of its poles. The feminine shadow does not respond to comfort alone. It responds to intensity paired with control, movement with awareness, power without servitude. The man who integrates these qualities stops being a comfortable option and becomes a destabilizing presence. And that is where attraction ceases to be an idea and becomes visceral. There is one illusion that must die for any of this to make sense: the belief that desire is a reward for good behavior. It never was. Desire does not reward. Desire responds. For too long, attraction was explained to you like a moral contract. Do this, be this, give this, and you will be chosen. Biology does not sign contracts. The unconscious does not negotiate. The body does not reason. It reacts. The man who begs for attention communicates lack. The man who dissolves to please communicates emptiness. The man obsessed with outcome becomes enslaved by outcome, and nothing suffocates desire faster than emotional slavery. Desire requires 2 grounded forces facing each other, not one chasing the other. Everything reverses when you stop asking to be chosen and start choosing, when you abandon anxiety for coherence, when your time is no longer available to anyone, when your energy stops leaking without direction. Many men call love what is actually dependence. They call sacrifice what is fear. They call patience what is self-abandonment. And from that place they expect desire. But desire does not arise where a man betrays himself to avoid loss. The female nervous system reacts to one precise signal: stability with intensity. Not lukewarm safety, not chaotic aggression. Intensity under control, direction with calm, power without violence, presence without anxiety. The man who sustains this balance stops being read as emotional shelter and starts being perceived as force. And force that does not need to impose itself becomes magnetic. And if real power were not about controlling others, but about governing yourself when no one is watching, here the final layer begins to reveal itself. Once you understand that attraction does not awaken through correctness, but through coherence, the entire internal map begins to reorganize. The problem was never that you lacked value. It was that your value leaked through behaviors rooted in fear of losing, fear of not being enough, fear of being replaced. And fear, when it governs a man, is always visible, not in his words, but in his timing, his posture, his tone, his inability to hold silence without rushing to fill it. The body speaks long before language intervenes. A man whose nervous system is unstable communicates instability even while saying the right things. His energy oscillates, his presence fragments. He reacts instead of deciding, and the feminine nervous system is exquisitely sensitive to this. Not because it analyzes it, but because it feels it. This is where most men misunderstand power. They assume power is dominance, pressure, control over others, but real power is regulation, the capacity to remain grounded while emotion rises, to hold direction while tension increases, to stay rooted while uncertainty appears. The man who can do this does not need to convince. His presence already answers the question. Neuroscience quietly confirms what instinct has always known. Attraction is regulated at the level of arousal, not logic. The limbic system reacts to signals of safety and strength simultaneously. Too much safety without intensity produces numbness. Too much intensity without safety produces anxiety. Desire emerges only when both coexist. This is why extremes fail. The aggressive man burns quickly and collapses into chaos. The overly agreeable man stabilizes everything and extinguishes tension. Neither sustains attraction. The nervous system seeks polarity, not comfort alone, not threat alone, but grounded contrast. And polarity is not something you perform. It is something you embody. This is where internal leadership becomes visible. A man with internal leadership does not outsource his emotional state to external validation. He does not monitor her reactions to decide who he is allowed to be. He does not chase reassurance. He does not shrink to preserve connection. He understands that connection built on self-erasure always ends in quiet resentment. When a man abandons the impulse to be chosen and assumes the responsibility to choose, a subtle inversion takes place. His attention sharpens, his standards solidify, his time acquires weight. His yes becomes meaningful because his no exists. And this is where attraction stops being negotiated and starts being felt. The woman senses this shift before she understands it. Conversations slow down, tests soften, emotional turbulence loses leverage, because she is no longer interacting with a man who is trying to secure her approval, but with one who is anchored in his own axis, and the nervous system responds to axes. This is why presence matters more than performance. You can say very little and still transmit authority. You can remain silent and still guide the interaction. Silence, when inhabited, creates tension. Silence, when empty, creates discomfort. The difference is internal weight. Philosophy has always circled this truth without softening it. Nietzsche warned that the man who does not assume his own force will inevitably live under the force of others. Schopenhauer saw desire as something that overtakes the man who lacks self-governance. And Machiavelli understood something even more uncomfortable. Power is never asked for, it is perceived. Perception precedes permission. This is where the illusion of manipulation must be dismantled. Nothing here is about tricks, tactics, or control over another person. Manipulation requires insecurity. Strategy requires clarity. One leaks, the other concentrates. The man who tries to manipulate reacts constantly to outcomes. The man who governs himself acts from principle and accepts consequences. This acceptance is magnetic, because when a man no longer fears loss, he stops bending reality to avoid it. He becomes selective instead of desperate, calm instead of compliant, firm instead of reactive. And firmness, when free of aggression, is read as safety with strength. Here lies the real secret behind what has been labeled dark attraction. It is not cruelty. It is not coldness. It is not emotional absence. It is emotional containment, the ability to feel without collapsing, to care without clinging, to desire without chasing. The feminine unconscious does not respond to a man who needs to be wanted. It responds to a man who wants and can walk away if alignment is lost. Not as punishment, as coherence. This is where internal control replaces emotional bargaining. You stop explaining your value, you start living it. You stop negotiating boundaries, you embody them. You stop trying to be understood. You focus on being internally aligned. And alignment changes everything. Your body slows down, your voice drops naturally, your eye contact stabilizes, your movements become economical. Nothing is forced. Everything is integrated. This is why the final transformation is not external. It is internal governance. The man who governs himself no longer needs to dominate anyone else. He does not seek superiority. He emanates solidity. He does not chase desire. He becomes one of its reference points. And here the payoff becomes unavoidable. The hidden mechanism behind female attraction is not manipulation, not morality, not performance. It is emotional self-mastery combined with direction, presence rooted in purpose, intensity regulated by control, strength that does not need permission to exist. When you operate from this center, attraction stops being something you pursue and becomes something you allow. You stop being pulled into emotional turbulence. You stop over-investing. You stop explaining yourself into invisibility. You receive instead of request. You decide instead of wait. You lead instead of react. This is the identity shift that closes the loop. From the anxious man to the centered man, from the reactive man to the man who directs, from the man who asks to the man who receives. And once this shift occurs, there is no going back. Because you no longer rely on hope, tactics, or approval. You rely on internal order. That is the real code. That is the method. That is the system. And once a man understands this, attraction is no longer mysterious. It is inevitable. There is something rarer than confidence, and that rarity is what actually ignites desire. A man who does not need to display confidence. Most men learn to perform certainty. They lower their voice. They occupy space. They rehearse assertiveness. But beneath that surface lives urgency, impulsiveness, emotional reactivity. And the female nervous system detects that fracture with surgical precision. What excites is not confidence. It is self-control. Nietzsche hinted at this when he spoke about the strength of the man who masters himself before attempting to master the world. Intensity without containment signals instability. Energy without direction signals chaos. A man who controls his impulses, who does not react automatically, who chooses when to move and when to remain still, transmits something deeper than confidence. He transmits internal power, and internal power is instinctively read as leadership. Research from the University of California consistently links emotional regulation with status and authority. Not because the man suppresses emotion, but because he is not hijacked by it. When a woman challenges, tests, provokes, or pressures, she is not trying to dominate. She is verifying solidity beneath appearance. It is a biological audit. The man who reacts excessively fails. The man who holds center passes. Most confuse reaction with authenticity. They believe expressing everything they feel is honesty, but honesty without containment becomes exposure. And exposure erodes the mystery that sustains desire. Self-control is not repression. It is choice, feeling without obeying, observing without collapsing, remaining present without urgency. In practice, this appears devastatingly simple, not answering immediately when provoked, not shifting tone when tested, not justifying when questioned, not escalating when silence would dominate, remaining neutral when emotion is expected. That behavior creates a rupture of expectation. The female brain anticipates reaction and receives stability. That discrepancy creates impact. When you demonstrate that emotion does not dictate your movement, you communicate a silent message. You are not governed by the environment. You govern yourself. And this is one of the deepest value signals the feminine instinct can register. Because a man who controls himself in small moments will be imagined as a man who controls himself under real pressure. Desire grows where instinctive safety exists, and instinctive safety does not come from reassurance, it comes from observation. Each time you do not react, something reorganizes on the other side. Each time you remain grounded without urgency, emotional hierarchy adjusts. Most men attempt to impress with attitude. Few understand that real attitude lives in restraint. The man who does not rush, does not explain, does not destabilize, creates a silent gravitational field. Not because he performs something extraordinary, but because he refrains from doing what everyone else does. And that difference transforms presence into desire. The final realization. There is a moment where all attempts to awaken desire become useless. It is the moment a man realizes that the harder he tries, the less happens. Carl Jung explained that desire emerges when the masculine archetype is integrated, not fragmented by approval-seeking or anxiety to be chosen. The feminine does not respond to lack disguised as technique. It responds to the presence of a man who is whole. When a man masters his anxiety, something opens silently around him. He does not push, he does not chase, he does not force connection. He occupies space naturally, and that empty space is essential. Because desire is not born from excessive stimulation. It is born from space that allows projection, imagination, curiosity. The man who rushes collapses that space. The man who holds presence allows desire to emerge on its own. Everything you've heard converges into a single truth. Removing the need for approval is not a social trick. It is internal reorganization. Activating controlled emotional tension is not instability. It is rhythm mastery. Holding self-control is not coldness. It is internal authority. When these elements align, behavior stops being forced and becomes coherent, and coherence is the deepest language of desire. Men who do not dominate their anxiety try to lead interactions. Men who do dominate allow the woman to reveal herself. One fights to be chosen, the other observes alignment. That inversion changes everything. Desire stops being something you pursue and becomes something that finds you. And here is the final truth few accept. There is no phrase, posture, or isolated behavior that sustains attraction if the internal state is fragile. What excites is not what you do in a moment. It is the silent accumulation of who you have become emotionally. Desire is not created in the act. It is the consequence of state. That is why the seduction code was never designed as a collection of external behaviors, but as a system of female psychological reading and male internal restructuring. It teaches how to maintain presence under pressure, how to create tension without chaos, how to occupy a position where desire does not need to be requested or provoked. It arises because the emotional environment allows it. This knowledge is not popular because it demands responsibility and internal mastery. But that is exactly why it works. Some men will continue trying to impress, explain, and chase. Others will understand that the game was never about effort, but positioning. The difference between them is not luck. It is not the women they meet. It is who learn to allow desire instead of begging for it. The access to this code is in the description and the pinned comment. Not as an empty promise, but as a clear path for those who decided to leave the spectator position and assume invisible control over their interactions. The moment you stop asking to be desired, you become impossible to ignore.